Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
We are a gentle, loving people, and we are singing for our lives. We are a gentle, loving people, and we are singing for our lives. Last stanza says, liberating people.
On Friday morning of the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship General Assembly in Jacksonville, Florida, Baptist News Global hosted a breakfast in partnership with the Association of Welcoming and Affirming Baptists, as well as Good Faith Media. Our keynote speaker for the event was Skye Perryman, who is the president of Democracy Forward. As BNG Executive Director Mark Wingfield put it, Perryman is a leading national voice in defense of democracy and against the authoritarian actions of the Trump administration. Her team has filed hundreds of lawsuits against the administration on behalf of federal workers, religious groups, immigration advocates, and others targeted for exclusion by the administration. They are the team responsible for suing to stop Trump's illegal $1.8 billion slush fund to pay January 6th conspirators. So for today's episode, I'm going to share audio from our event.
In the Tony Award-winning musical, Suffs, Shayna Taub chronicles Alice Paul and her friends as they relentlessly fight for the right to vote. Each time I watch or listen, which is a lot, I can't help but think of Skye, her tenacity, her courage, her infectious desire to never give up, and her ability to inspire those around her to join in the work. Skye Perryman is someone every person in this room can and should claim with pride. For you, the collective, compassionate, inclusive, justice-centered Cooperative Baptist helped raise her. Growing up at 7th and James Baptist Church in Waco instilled in her, as she says, a commitment to the teachings of equality, kindness, and courage. This community taught her standing up to schoolyard bullies and protecting equality for all is a responsibility given to each and every one of us. Whether it is testifying in Congress or boldly challenging powerful administrations in court, through her work at Democracy Forward, Skye exemplifies what it means to live into what her faith asks of her. Her forthcoming book, Ordinary People, Extraordinary Times, A Guide for All of Us, reminds us that defending democracy requires courage in the face of fear. As she says it, courage is the new currency. Friends, Skye is doing the work, showing up with courage in the public square, demonstrating what it means to love our neighbor. I am convinced that one day there will be a musical written about Skye. In fact, there is one song in the musical Suffs titled Great American Bitch that I have already rewritten and choreographed just for her. And T, wherever you are, you and I have an amazing duet. So friends, it is now my absolute honor to welcome my friend, my hero, a true national treasure, our great American Baptist, Skye Perryman.
I love Missy. She can call you a bitch and just make you love her at the same time. That's a lot of talent only a Baptist minister's wife has. So thank you so much, Missy, for that interjection. And good morning. And I just want to thank Baptist News Global and the Alliance of Welcoming and Affirming Baptist, as well as Good Faith Media, for hosting this breakfast and this time for community and fellowship together, and for inviting me and our team at Democracy Forward to participate. And I'm going to wish everybody a happy Juneteenth, but Dr. McNeil, I love a good origin story, and you've given us two today. You've told us about the origin, which I did not know, of Lift Every Voice and Sing here in Florida, and you also gave us a wonderful origin story of the folk song that we just sang, but neither one of those origin stories begin in Texas. And as a Texan, we can't have a breakfast without a Texas origin story. And so I'll just say, as a person that was born and raised in Texas, we have a special place for Juneteenth when 2,000 Union soldiers arrived at Galveston Bay in 1865 to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation that had been written down on paper for 2.5 years but had not been realized for people in the state. As a result of what happened on Juneteenth, 250,000 is the best estimate we have, enslaved Black Americans in Texas were liberated, and they declared June 19th a day of celebration, freedom, and liberation. And for decades, before Juneteenth was a national holiday, it was a holiday in Texas, and it means so much to so many of Texas's children and those of us that were proud to be born in the state. I grew up in Waco, Texas, but I spent a lot of my summers in the Houston and Galveston area because that's where my mother's family was from, and my aunt was a public school educator and principal in Houston, and as a child I wanted to be a teacher. And so one of my favorite things to do after school would let out in Waco was to go to Houston, where my aunt lived, and to accompany her to the after school days, right after students were out. It was amazing as a young person myself to get to see the behind the scenes insides of the school and how it functioned. And those days would follow one after the other, and I would do wonderful things with my aunt, who I'm named after and who passed away several years ago. And all of a sudden we'd be at Juneteenth, where there would be amazing celebrations of liberation and freedom far before the rest of the United States had come to honor Juneteenth the way we do now. We were doing that in Texas, in Houston, and in the Galveston area. And then I would go to my grandparents' small farm in Magnolia, Texas, and I don't think Chris C. or the C's are here, but they're from that area of Texas. And then we would celebrate July 4th, which was my grandparents' favorite holiday. And so growing up, I always knew that you had to celebrate Juneteenth before you got to celebrate July 4th. And as I grew up and learned more about this country, I realized that that probably isn't just a calendar coincidence, but it's actually a meaningful coincidence that you cannot celebrate the ideals of this country on July 4th, as we are going to do this year on the 250th, without first celebrating Juneteenth. Juneteenth is a reminder for all of us that freedom on a piece of paper, whether it is written with the soaring rhetoric of our founding fathers that all people are created equal, that we get to all pursue happiness, or whether it was written on the Emancipation Proclamation, words on a paper, that doesn't get it done. It's people that get it done. And freedom on paper is no kind of freedom. It's freedom that has to be realized. And Juneteenth tells us that, forces us to wrestle with that, and forces us to wrestle with our own roles in that struggle and what we can do as a people. I learned really early on that Juneteenth also reminds us that liberation is a communal experience. No one is free until we are all free. That's what we say on Juneteenth. Dr. King, about 100 years later after Juneteenth, would say an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We're all connected, and as a community of faith, we know that we're connected. But somehow in our society, powerful people start thinking that they can win freedom for themselves without really being able and enjoy that freedom, without pushing for freedom for others. Juneteenth reminds us that the whole house of cards will come down if that's the way we look at freedom. That our journey is bound up together. We need the lessons of Juneteenth today. This year's Juneteenth arises, of course, in the 250th anniversary of the United States. at a time when our nation finds itself in great crisis. I would say democracy is being put to the test, but guys, we are already past the test. Democracy is now grasping for air. In April, the US Supreme Court eviscerated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, and states across the South, including in this state of Florida, are moving very quickly in order to completely write out fair representation for Black and brown people. The decision in April wasn't really new. It comes on the heels of a multi-decade effort to roll back civil rights, and including over the last about 12, 13 years, efforts to specifically roll back voting rights in this country. But we gather here today on Juneteenth, which reminds us that the fight for freedom, the fight for our rights, the fight for human dignity, the fight for our democracy, Juneteenth reminds us this is an old fight, that it's happening in a new time. This nation has always been struggling to achieve true democracy for all people. We're kidding ourselves if we think that we somehow had finally achieved it. Juneteenth reminds us that we are in the midst of an old fight in a new time. Today, across the nation, there are Juneteenth celebrations kicking off the Freedom Summer of 2026, including in Galveston, Texas, where our friends at Black Voters Matter are kicking off a summer of activism, advocacy, education, organizing, community building, to promote voting rights and to impose incursions on voting rights. Juneteenth today is a reminder of the old fight in a new time. I encourage you all that are here today, that are in community with others, that are in your churches, to get engaged in Freedom Summer, to find out the ways that you and your communities, and maybe even your communities of faith or your churches, can help people make a plan to vote, and to not have our voices silenced. We don't have to tell people how to vote. You guys don't do that. But we do need to make sure that everyone is afforded the basic dignity of being able to vote. And that is what this Freedom Summer in 2026 is all about. Yes. It is an old fight in a new time, and there is a major role for people of faith, and there is a major role for this community of faith, including so many of you that lead faith communities or in communities in the South and in states that have been on a long journey to continue to silence people's voices. So please get engaged in Freedom Summer. However, the evisceration of voting rights by our Supreme Court is just one of the many things and the many challenges that we are seeing for our democracy that is grasping for air on this Juneteenth. Over the last 18 months, the federal government has detained thousands of people without basic process, thousands of people. The cries of children in my home state in Dilley, Texas, who have been deprived of their families and their caregivers and their childhood. When you drive past Dilley, you can hear them crying out. That is what we're facing. We've seen the military deployed in our cities, including the city of Washington, D.C., where I raised my 10-year-old son. We are still under occupation. ICE has surged. And even after the murder of people, and yes, those people happen to have been US citizens, even after the murder of people at the hands of ICE in Minnesota, our United States Congress has found fit this week to provide over $70 billion in funding to ICE. Not to the Department of Homeland Security, just to ICE. Law enforcement is very important, and we all know that, but we also know the difference between a mask in the shadows paramilitary force that is trampling on people's rights by the day and sound law enforcement. And what our government has doubled down on is funding that unlawful, inhumane paramilitary force that will not even operate outside the shadows, that insist on wearing masks because they know what they do is wrong. The government has targeted people because of their sexual orientation and because of their gender identity. Of course, this is happening in states and local communities across the country as well, even going so far as to seek private medical records of people. And the administration has sought to prioritize a narrow religious ideology over the broad diversity of faith traditions, both within the Christian faith tradition and within all of the faith traditions that this nation represents. We have seen the president on White House channels post images generated trying to make him look like a deity, trying to make him look like Jesus Christ. That is a maneuver that you only see in countries where political leaders are seeking to become God-like. We rejected the divine right of kings nearly 250 years ago, and we need to reject it again today. And many wish, however, to roll back those types of gains, and I'm not even talking about people in our own United States government. We've seen the Southern Baptist Convention just in the past few days vote to ban women in ministry, somehow forgetting that the first person who ever brought the good news of Jesus Christ was a woman. We've seen religious and ideological movements seek to undermine and shame people based on their sexual orientation or their gender identity, somehow forgetting that we worship a transformative God that changes people's and changes people's identities. So Juneteenth does remind us that we are amidst an old fight in a new time. Whether it is the fight for women in ministry that has existed in this denomination for decades, whether it is the fight for the full recognition of LGBTQ people, or whether it is the fight for voting rights, human rights, due process, and basic constitutional rights, Juneteenth reminds us we are in an old fight, but this is a new time. So what are we to do in this new time? I would propose the first thing we have to do is to remember who we are. We are a community of faith and a community of freedom. And we stand on the shoulders of those who did far more and fought far harder battles with far less than what we have today. We stand on the shoulders of revolutionaries who did throw off the reins of monarchy. We stand on the shoulders of the abolitionists, of the suffragists, of the freedom riders, of the LGBTQ movement leaders, of the immigrants' rights leaders. We stand on the shoulders of all of these people who did far more with less. There was a Supreme Court then that actually continued to enforce the dehumanization of Black enslaved people, to be clear. This is not a new challenge. This is an old fight in a new time. And as a community of faith in the Baptist community, we have to remember that we have always stood for freedom, for the separation of church and state since the very beginning. Thought I would get a clap for that. For soul freedom and for priesthood of the believer, and on and on. We also have to remember that civil rights, they were born in the pulpits of Black churches, and in particular in the pulpits of Black Baptist churches across this nation. And we have to remember that there were too many white churches, too many white Baptist churches in the South that were too slow on the question of civil rights, and that are too slow on the question of human rights for all people, including LGBTQ rights. We need to remember that history because we inherit that history and we get to write the next chapter. We get to learn from that history and perhaps not make the old mistakes, perhaps bring some learning to this old fight in a new time. We have to remember who we are, and as followers of Christ, we know that loving the neighbor is the way. Now, I'm a very skilled lawyer. I've learned how to say that out loud. I'm a very skilled lawyer. And I promise you that I can do mental gymnastics with the best of people. But there is just no way to square this circle. It's love your neighbor. There's no exceptions. There's no exceptions. You still have to love your neighbor if it's scary, if it's uncomfortable, if it might cause a little conflict. There's no footnote accepting us out of that. We are called to love our neighbors. As followers of Christ, we know that no powerful person, no institution, no cultural movement can get us out of that command. We have to love our neighbors, and we can't sit by while children are torn from their families, while hate is used as a political tool to stir up controversy and try to make us think that we are more different than we are the same. And while there is a concerted effort to have us feel isolated and alone, to have us target particular people groups, concerted effort, we don't get to sit idly by while that is happening as followers of Christ. We also have to remember what we stand for. That's part of remembering who we are, and that is why one of the reasons I'm so incredibly grateful to get to be here with you today. Because over the past 18 months, I've been in communities across the country and seen what has happened when powerful institutions have been confused by this moment, when they have somehow forgotten that if you are sitting on the sidelines in this moment, you are going to end up on the wrong side of history. Powerful institutions have been confused about this moment, at best sitting on the sidelines, at worst, aiding and abetting this movement of hate and terror that is taking over our country. But what we have had the privilege of seeing in our work at Democracy Forward, and what we have seen in all of you, is that as powerful institutions have stepped back, people have stepped forward, including people of faith, and including people in this community, and including people in this room. One of the first actions the administration took when it came into office was to rescind a policy that has been in effect for 3 decades, okay? That means in Republican administrations, it means in Democratic administrations, it even means in the president's first administration, that protected houses of worship, hospitals, and schools from indiscriminate ICE enforcement. Immediately after that policy was rescinded, there were stories, and some of you reported them, of people not being able to hold worship services because of the fear that simmered throughout communities. The Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, at a time when most people were afraid to step forward, when we were making phone call after phone call of people saying, I wish I could help you, but I just can't, because my board's gonna be upset. What if the president targets me in my community? The Cooperative Baptist Fellowship and other denominations stepped forward to sue and challenge that rescission. And as a result, when the first federal court order that remains in place protecting Cooperative Baptist Fellowship churches as well as other houses of worship from indiscriminate ICE enforcement. But that's not all. The Alliance of Baptists and the American Baptists then stepped forward in a second suit, bringing a suit on behalf of even more religious communities and securing a second court order in a different court, strengthening the law that remains in effect today, that is protecting houses of worship for many denominations across this country. We may be at a turning point now where it's going to become more in vogue for people to step up, and they're realizing that if you give in to fear, you kind of don't even have a chance now. But that was not the ethos at the time that the CBF and that our partners and our clients stepped up to challenge this on behalf of the most marginalized people and on behalf of the value of communal worship and religious liberty in this country. And you challenged it, you looked fear in the face, you didn't blink, and you won. Let's have a round of applause for that. The communities of faith have been showing up in many ways as ICE surged in Minnesota. Ministers and deacons and faith leaders from diverse religious tradition got on buses, got on planes, and went to Minnesota. And guess what? You got to get your traveling shoes on, because we're going to need you in places across this country, potentially later this year as we approach elections. But it wasn't just people that went to Minnesota. It was faith communities starting to speak out about what this means and what this moment calls us to do as people of faith. You will remember the chilling video that aired across the country from an Episcopal bishop in New Hampshire who said, I'm going to read it. I've asked them, he's talking about the religious leaders that serve under him. I've asked them to get their affairs in order, to make sure they have their wills written, because it may be that now is no longer the time for statements, but for us with our bodies to stand between the powers of this world and the most vulnerable. Amen. That's what an Episcopal bishop said as ICE was surging in Minneapolis. This is an old fight in a new time. But what's not new is the role of communities of faith in standing shoulder to shoulder and in standing between hate and love and insisting on love. I could list hundreds, truly, because I've counted them, of examples of faith communities over the past 18 months alone where we have seen courage come out of communities. And we can also list a lot of examples of faith communities that are misusing our faith to engage in hate and targeting. You don't just get a pass just because you're in a faith community. We have to be intentional about the choices that we are going to make. My alma mater, Georgetown University, I went to law school at Georgetown, undergrad at Baylor. My alma mater, Georgetown University, first thing out of the gate, president goes to Georgetown University Law School and says, you've got to discontinue this diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility. Less than 48 hours later, Dean Traynor at the time was dean of the Georgetown Law School, sent it back, said, I'm sorry, we're Jesuit. We don't know how to operate our institution consistent with our values and consistent with our faith based on what you were doing. So no, we won't. That prospective U.S. Attorney Ed Martin, he never got confirmed. Georgetown Law, having a great incoming class, teaching law like they always taught. SNAP benefits. For the first time in U.S. history, a United States president, sought to weaponize the SNAP program, which provides nutrition to 42 million Americans, including, by the way, Americans, the vast majority of which that are working multiple jobs. No president's ever done that before in a shutdown, to try to weaponize a SNAP program to deprive people of nutrition, of the ability to go to the grocery store on a Friday after work and get your kids what they need for the weekend in order to try to score a political point in the middle of a shutdown. It was the Rhode Island Council of Churches that stepped right up with our team, as well as community organizations across the country, that sued to stop that politicization. And I could truly go on and on and on about the role that faith communities are having in protecting migrants and protecting refugees and standing up for people who are being targeted as a result of their gender identity. But we're going to have to do more. This is an old fight and a new time. So in addition to remembering who we are, which includes remembering what we stand for, we also have to do what the poet Wendell Berry tells us to do, which is to practice resurrection. We are a people that don't believe that the door gets closed and it can't be open again. We don't believe that the backslide can't be turned around. We are a people that believe. We believe in promise, and we believe in realizing that promise. And so we have to ask some hard questions. Are we going to be willing to overcome what is happening now? And when we overcome it, to use our courage to demand broad and bolder change than this country has ever seen? Are we going to be willing to call for truly achieving democracy for all people in this country? Or reforming the systems and structures of this country, or reimagining them altogether to be systems and structures that are actually meant to hold everyone in this room? Because the structures of this country, perhaps while well-intended, were not meant to hold everyone in this room. And they're not going to work for everyone in this room or for everyone in the future if we don't have those hard questions. That sounds like a great conversation and a great action plan to be making on America's 250th anniversary. We can have another founding moment in this country where we can take a crisis and we can make a catalyst for change. Juneteenth also reminds us of the power of ordinary people. Ordinary people who find themselves living in what history will know as an extraordinary time. And I want to talk about someone that's a hero to me, Dr. Opal Lee. Some of you know of her and know her. Dr. Opal Lee was born into an African-American family in East Texas, in Marshall, Texas in the 1920s. I was in Fort Worth yesterday. Her family moved to Fort Worth when she was about 12 years old. And when they moved to Fort Worth, they located in a neighborhood that was predominantly white. When she was 12 years old, after she had been in her house 5 days, on June 19th, a white mob of people came and vandalized the house, and burned the house down. On June 19th, 1939. Opal Lee, however, grew up with justice in her heart. And somehow, even the hate and terrorism that was aimed at her and her family didn't harden her. It motivated her to work for justice. It also motivated her to want to tell the story of Juneteenth. Because at that time, it had been just under 100 years. 1860s, 1930s. What had it been, 60, 70 years? Since the troops arrived in Galveston, since Liberation Day, we made those writings a reality. But yet her house had been burned down by a white racist mob in Fort Worth, Texas on Juneteenth. And so as she grew up and became an educator and worked in her community, she started telling the story of Juneteenth. Not just for us to remember our history, but she would say to remember that we need to make sure it doesn't repeat itself. She would set up walks around the state of Texas and around communities across the country, 2.5-mile walks. Why 2.5? Because it was 2.5 years before the after the Emancipation Proclamation was put in word form. 2.5 years before troops arrived and made that freedom a reality for the 250,000 enslaved Black Americans living in Texas. And then, as the national community continued to not respond to calls to make Juneteenth a national holiday, she planned a walk from Fort Worth to Washington. Ordinary people by her side, living in an extraordinary time, to raise awareness around this day. In 2021, 6 months after the first violent disruption of a transition of peaceful presidential power, a year and a few months after the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and countless others, President Biden signed into law making Juneteenth a national holiday. And I've heard that there might be something on social media today where our president appears to be confused about why there's a federal holiday today. We aren't confused in this room. So, Dr. Lee said, if people can be taught to hate, they can be taught to love. And so I think on this Juneteenth, when we're in fellowship and community together, let us get to the loving part, to loving our neighbor, no exceptions, loving our nation. To love someone, you have to see them for who they are. So let's see this nation for what it is. And let's love it through trying to make it better, through demanding that we reimagine democracy, not just rebuild and restore it, but that we reimagine a true democracy that can hold all people, that is worthy of Juneteenth, and that is worthy of the people whose shoulders that we stand on. So maybe now, with the experiences we have in this time and the experiences that I've tried to recount here, you can understand how I concluded, pretty early on after learning a lot about this country, that you cannot celebrate July 4th without first committing yourself to the work of Juneteenth. And that could not be more true than on this 250th year of the country. But we have to do more than just reflect. We have to act. The people whose shoulders we stand on, they're not here anymore, guys. They're not here. And so what happens next is up to us. What happens in our communities, what happens in our faith communities, what happens in our nation, and what happens in the world. And I believe that people, ordinary people, the American people in this community, I believe that people are up to the task. Some of you have heard me speak before, and I occasionally, I don't do it all the time, but I think in Baptist circles I end up doing it all the time, refer to the Reverend William Sloane Coffin, who pastored the Riverside Church of New York during turbulent times, including during the Vietnam War. Prior to pastoring the Riverside Church, Dr. Coffin was a freedom writer, which, by the way, you get to be today in 2026. Go join Freedom Summer. If you ever wondered what you would do then, guess what? You get to answer it now. So it's not a mental experiment anymore, guys. You get to answer it now. But he marched with Dr. King. He himself was arrested about 30 times during the civil rights movement. And he would close many of his services with this benediction that I would like us to reflect on this Juneteenth. May God give you the grace never to sell yourself short, the courage to risk something big for the sake of something good, the courage to remember that the world is now far too dangerous for anything but truth, and far too small for anything but love. So let's take these words and recommit to fighting this old fight in this new time, to doing the work of love and freedom, to doing the work of Juneteenth. Let's do the work not just on this 250th anniversary year, but for the next 250 years. We don't need to rebuild our democracy. We need to reimagine it into a place that can hold all of us and that can hold all of our neighbors and that can be a shining light. So thank you for having me in community with you all today. Thank you for bringing us together, and thanks again to the hosting organizations for this time for fellowship. And thank you for stepping up, even in the face of fear, over the past 18 months.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll be back with another episode on Thursday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.